I have been told in the past that churches are painfully slow to function and act. Some blame volunteers, that volunteers don't move very quickly. Others blame committee structures. I think there's biblical scriptural evidence that that's how it should be. You spend multiple times ignoring what you're supposed to do until you finally figure it out. The Lord called to Samuel 3 times before he realized what was going on. Okay, maybe that's not the way it should be. You have to look at Samuel's an interesting figure. He's a figure we don't always spend that much time on. He's pivotal in the fact that Samuel is the one who brings about the real kingship in Israel. Selects David, brings things back on course. I don't know if you heard some of the negativity that exists in our reading today towards Eli. Eli is one of the last judges. He, in fact, is the judge that finally made the people of Israel say, we're just done with this. We're tired of using judges. We want a king to tell us what to do. Right? Before that, individuals were expected really to lead in a family structure, in a village structure, and only when they had disputes did they go before the judge. The judge was leading just by managing disputes for the most part. Maybe sometimes getting people to do minor coalitions voluntarily. The people of Israel felt abandoned. They said, we want a king. Eli, his goal, by the way, for those who don't know it, was to make sure it was his family that remained in control of Israel. He plotted that his sons would take over for him, but his sons didn't much care. They liked to make a mockery of living a life of virtue. They, in fact, even mocked worship of God. But Eli was dead set that his kids were going to take over. It's kind of funny that Eli didn't hear the voice of God himself. It took Samuel, a little boy who was dropped off by his mom at the temple, to be given to the church, to be given to the Lord for one simple purpose: just to watch the tabernacle, the sanctuary. Imagine someone who would sleep in the back of the church, and his job was just to make sure that there was enough oil, that the candles were burning, and he was Eli's servant for doing that. Eli was the one who actually controlled where the oil was. Do you remember the oil sermon a few years ago when I talked about the cost of the oil? This is not cheap stuff. I think I did a modern day price comparison that the oil used for working in the temple cost tens of thousands of dollars. Eli kept that stuff locked up, but when it was time, David would go and get it. Eli did all this. Eli was falling asleep. Eli was drowsy. His vision was sick. All of this is symbolic, by the way. I don't really think that God has a problem with individuals who are losing their eyesight. But in the Bible, it was symbolic. The people of Israel were losing their way. They were losing their way because they were taking the riches given to them and they were using it for their own purposes, their own desires. They said, we want to have the finest meals, the finest robes, the finest other things, and they would do it. But they mocked worship. Samuel, as a child, was given by a mother who loved the Lord so much she would hand her child to the church, and Samuel was raised caring for the place of worship. Think about that. Your life is devoted to caring for the place worship happens. Do you think you will ever hear the voice of God if you do not pray? Do you ever think, if you think worship is a joke, that you're going to hear the voice of God? But what if you devote your life to living in the place of service and dedication to God? Prayer becomes something that you witness on a daily basis, every time it happens. In fact, you're the one who prepares for the prayers that are offered. Eventually, your ears open, your eyes open, and you hear the cry of God, asking you just simply to live according to the Word. In our story here, the light actually of the temple, there was a lamp that was supposed to burn continually to make it so when God would enter the Holy of Holies, he wouldn't trip. Oh, that's a joke. Okay. There was a light that was always there, a reminder of God's presence. That light went out. It's a statement symbolizing that sometimes in our lives we forget God exists. And I'm going to tell you, as a church, man, you can be in a board meeting and forget that God exists. You can do church business and you're dedicating your life to the church, but nothing in your heart is about God. It happens. Samuel is a reminder that sometimes that happens. Now, Samuel didn't sit down, by the way, and listen to God's voice, go through a reasoned debate on the cost-effectiveness, the efficacy, the rational arguments being presented, and said, yes, I think that's the right thing. Samuel heard a call. Well, he ignored it 3 times. But eventually, Eli said, listen. Samuel didn't say, why should I do that? I need to get my sleep for tomorrow. He didn't say, I'm so busy cleaning up after everybody. He just listened. And when he listened and was obedient, he rose from being, it's kind of a story of success, right? You start in the mailroom and end up the CEO. He started up as basically the janitor for the temple and became the person who selected the true king of Israel. He became the greatest of prophets simply by listening. You know when Samuel got in trouble? He stops listening. He stops being obedient. Obedience. Obedience is something funny because it wouldn't be a thing unless you didn't want to do it. Most people in their lives are told to do things they don't want to do, and the first response is, but I don't want to. You need to do your homework. I don't want to do it. You need to go to work, but I don't want to do it. How many things in your life are you told that you want to do and you don't want to do it? What makes somebody obedient isn't doing what they want to do. That's just playing, right? I mean, think about it. If you could do everything you wanted to do, your life would be playing. It's those musicians. Ever wake up and say, man, I don't want to practice? Come on. It happens. Ever wake up and say, I'm just too tired to do what I need to do? You all are great, so I know this is what you do. The people who are obedient improve. Those who are willing to say, I don't wanna, but I gotta, are the ones who improve. The ones who hear the cry of God and say, I don't feel like going to church today, but I'm going to go anyway because that's what I feel God asks me to do. Then your ears are open to God when you're at church. And I'll tell you, when you force yourself and say, God, why do you want me here? You hear something different than if you're going for the wrong reasons of one thing or another and it's all about you. Sometimes it's in the difficulty of the struggle of doing the things you are commanded to do that you find the greatest reward. Again, temptation. Temptation is where we find God, not where we lose God. Temptation is when part of what we think and know and understand is what's good, but what we love is also present. If we listen to our better angels, if we listen to the Word, if we listen to what God is calling us to do, if we listen to what our head is saying, and we do those things, we improve, we get better, we conquer temptation. 3 times Samuel is called. I like to think of it in terms of this. Sometimes I sit there and I have a good idea. I'm like, hey, that's a good idea. I like that thought. Well, that's the first call. And do you know what I always do? I ignore it. I get distracted, right? I have a good thought. I walk away from it, do some laundry, maybe something else. Boom, the thought's gone. Then maybe I hear it again, but this time I connect it to something that's a little more what I desire. Right? But then I let it go. And then finally, God, I guess I really should do this. And then I do it. And after I've had the thought, the desire, and the action, all of a sudden, I can celebrate in a beautiful connection of what it actually was that I was struggling with the entire time before. I don't know if that makes sense. We can think about something, we love it, and then we do it, but it's only once those 3 things happen that we truly make a connection with why God called us to do it. We don't get it if we don't think about it. We don't do much if we don't think about it. If we don't love it, and if we don't do it, we never actually make the connection. Kind of 3 callings you can think about. What are the 3 things that we have to do to actually feel connected to God? What is the likelihood that we're going to do any of that without obedience? Any of you ever said, man, if I just would have done what I thought in the first place? Ever do that? Man, I had this idea years ago and I never did it. I knew it was right years ago, just didn't do it. We have to think about, desire it, do it, and it's in the process of all those things coming together that we actually bring the Lord's commandment for us into life. But it starts with that icky word of obedience, and nobody likes it, right? Obedience is bad. We're free. If God loves us, He wouldn't make us do things we don't want to do. I want you to take the word obedience away. Practice. Every sports person loves to practice, right? They go to practice. Maybe we don't like the word obedience. What does it mean for you to practice your spiritual life? It means you actually have to do it. Within practice is obedience. But we hate the word obedient. Anyone got a theme here? We hate the word obedient. We're Americans, gosh darn it. Do you guys know this? Americans are horrible. Americans don't like obedience. You go to countries in Asia, in Africa, in South America, obedience is where it's at. It's a value that's taught. Here, we don't teach obedience. We teach free thinking and independence, which, don't get me wrong, I love free thinking and independence. But at some point, we need to be willing to do the things we don't want to do. So this week, I would like for you to think about the concept of obedience. What are the things God is calling you to do, to say, to share, that you're not? What does it mean for you to be obedient to what you have learned from your life, from God? What have you learned is right that you're not willing to say? It is only when you speak up and are willing to listen and act on that that you respond to the voice of the Lord. Here's my argument. I think Eli was hearing the call of God all along. He just didn't care about listening. He did one of his greatest things was simply telling Samuel to do what he wished he could have done better, which was to listen and be obedient. So I hope in the coming week you will find some way to leave the light of the temple on, to rekindle it, and to be obedient to the Lord's leading. Amen.